Our hearing today is Protecting the Right to Vote, Best and Worst Practices. I welcome our esteemed panel to today's hearing and salute all of my colleagues. I'm going to make my opening statement, then I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Roy, and then we'll go to the opening statements of all of our witnesses. A great Republican president once spoke of government of the people, by the people, and for the people, and this has been the tantalizing ideal of America. But of course, it has not always been like this here. We began as a slave republic of white male property owners over the age of 21, and it's only been through waves of profound social and political struggle that we've opened America up to change into inclusion. And this is the story of the 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery, the 14th Amendment, which gave us equal protection and due process, the 15th Amendment, which ended discrimination in voting based on race, the 17th Amendment, which shifted the mode of election of U.S. senators from the state legislatures to the people, the 19th Amendment, 99 years ago, which gave us women's suffrage, the 23rd Amendment, which gave people here in Washington, D.C., the right to participate in presidential elections, and the 24th Amendment, which abolished poll taxes in federal elections, and the 26th Amendment, which lowered the voting age to 18. This is also the story of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Voting in American life has had both an ideal history and a real history. There is no more celebrated ideal than that of voting rights for all. But in reality, there have been constant efforts to lock people out of the franchise and to keep them from participating. And we must not forget the blood, sweat, and tears that have been shed in the struggle to win the right to vote for everyone. I have a hero named Bob Moses who went south at age 26 years old in 1960, a philosophy graduate student at Harvard. He traveled to Mississippi, where he found that less than 1% of African Americans in that state were registered to vote. Less than 1% of African Americans were registered. Nearly all had been disenfranchised by intimidation and violence, character and literacy tests administered at the polls, poll taxes, grandfather clauses, and so on. Moses likened the situation when he got there to the Iron Curtain in Europe, behind which millions of Eastern Europeans lived under the boot of the Soviet Union. Mississippi and the Deep South, he said, were behind a cotton curtain where no one dared challenge the racist sheriffs and bosses who controlled every aspect of social, economic, and political life. And these sheriffs and bosses, we must remember, were Democrats. And we must never forget that both parties can and have participated in disenfranchisement schemes. Yesterday, it was mostly Democrats. Today, it is mostly Republicans. Originally, Bob Moses went to Mississippi thinking that he'd participate in sit-ins. He'd seen the pictures of the solemn teenage protesters in newspapers, and he later wrote of his response that these young people looked the way that I felt. But segregation in public accommodations was not the heart of the problem he found when he got to Mississippi. The heart of it was disenfranchisement of the black community. This was the lock on the door of the whole system of Jim Crow. And while many imagine that the sit-ins were somehow more radical than registering people to vote, Moses observed that he was living in a two-thirds African-American congressional district where virtually none of the black people could vote. The most radical solution to the problem of structural racism, in the sense of going to the root of the problem, he said, would be a campaign to challenge the disenfranchisement of the black community and to work to go door to door to register people to vote. And that's what he did, and it was terrifying and dangerous work. He was beaten nearly to his death more than once just trying to enter the county building to register people to vote. But in the process of this struggle, Bob Moses and his friends in SNCC woke up the black community, stirred the conscience of young people across America, and shook racist America to the core, and they coined a term that would transform not just Mississippi, but American law and politics forever. One person, one vote. Today, the gains of the modern civil rights movement, which many historians call the Second Reconstruction, are under severe attack. A 5-4 decision of the Supreme Court in 2013 in Shelby County versus Holder invalidated the coverage formula of the Voting Rights Act in Section 4, effectively destroying the Section 5 preclearance requirement and setting us back decades in the law of voting rights. With the Voting Rights Act intact, jurisdictions with a discriminatory history had to submit proposed changes like voter purges, polling place closures, and reduced voter registration hours to the Department of Justice or to the United States District Court for the District of Columbia before they could go through. Now this check is gone, and people experiencing suffrage restrictions and obstacles must go and find a lawyer and go to court and hope that they can convince a judge to intervene to make a change under Section 2. So, 6 years after that decision, hundreds of polling places have been closed across the land. Millions of voters have been purged from the rolls. Early voting has been cut back sharply in a number of states, and strict voter ID laws have gone into effect in many jurisdictions. Virtually all of these restrictions have been in Republican states. Proponents of the new voting obstacle course say that they are just trying to prevent voter fraud. We often hear from the president about the threat of rampant illegal voting, but study after study has failed to reveal any significant evidence of voter fraud at all, at least the kind they're talking about. One comprehensive study conducted at Loyola Law School examined more than 1 billion votes cast between 2000 and 2014 and revealed only 31 credible instances of voter fraud. 31 out of 1 billion, less than 1/100th of 1%. The way you steal in America, the way that you steal elections in America, everyone knows, is you run elections in America, and you run them in a way that closes out substantial parts of the electorate. Now, the good news is that just as there is a strong push to eliminate voting opportunities and rights in certain states, there's a powerful recognition across the land that voting is the essential foundation of democratic power and citizenship, and that we should be securing and expanding the right of the people to vote however we can. So today, we're going to showcase both some of the best practices in protecting the vote, along with the worst practices, canceling out voter rights and opportunities. And on the good side, we have found automatic voter registration, where eligible voters are added to the rolls unless they choose to opt out of it, which can dramatically increase the number of registered citizens. We've also found election day registration, which offers a crucial backstop for voters who may be stripped of their registration without their knowledge or just still learning about the process. And we've also found early voting and absentee voting policies, which offer flexibility to busy working Americans who could not otherwise make it to the polls. And we're going to hear about these from expert witnesses. In the 2016 presidential election, only 58% of eligible voters cast a ballot. Less than half of eligible citizens voted in 2018. We can do a lot better as a society by enlarging the opportunities for voting rather than restricting them. Eventually, I think, and we'll talk about this another time, we will need a constitutional amendment guaranteeing the right of every citizen to vote, a point our Constitution is very ambiguous on, unlike constitutions around the world which have put this front and center. But in the meantime, let us act however we can at both the state and federal level to protect the voting rights of the people. And I thank the witnesses today for being here to help us through this process.